Let me just.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, January 21st, and this is session B of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I am Seth Reisman, Deputy Director of Design Review at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn your camera and microphone off if you do not wish to be recorded. And I apologize for not sharing the introductory slides, but my sharing function is not working at the moment. For the purposes of the record, commissioners present are Gilly Smith, Commissioner Love, Commissioner Lubenow, and Commissioner Ron. Tonight's agenda will include two presentations for One Joslin Place in the Longwood Medical Area, and tonight's meeting procedures will follow the typical BCDC subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, and public testimony. For the commissioner's benefit, we have asked the proponent to prepare two separate presentations, one focused on the connectors and the other focused on the public realm immediately surrounding the building. And to the proponent, though we spoke last week about doing the public realm meeting first, due to commissioner availability, I want to see if you are amenable to starting with the connector presentation first, followed by discussion, and then followed by a presentation on the public realm. If that works for you, please let me know. I will be promoting Michael. And unfortunately, Mimi, it looks like I'm going to have to call on you to promote Michael. As that ability was taken away from me.
And who else? Am I elevating Kevin Sullivan?
Yes, please, Mimi. Good evening, everyone.
And so, Michael, anybody else besides Kevin we should elevate?
I think that's it for now. We have many other members of the proponent teams available this evening. Should we have questions, we can identify them and promote them if necessary for discussion. But I absolutely, Seth, based on the commissioner's availability, we will be extremely flexible and we can present the connectors portion first.
Okay, appreciate that. So I'll read the preamble and then let you all dive in. A proposed project at One Joslin Place in the Longwood Medical Area is seeking Article 80B entitlement and contemplates the development of 495,000 square feet of hospital use and 250 garage parking spaces in a single building on an approximately 1 acre site. The proposed project is associated with the BIDMC and DFCI 10-year institutional master plans approved by the BPDA board on October 10th, 2024. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the design subcommittee following an introduction at the monthly meeting on December 3rd. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes. I will give you a 2-minute warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Seth. Good evening, everyone. So glad to spend some time together this evening to talk about the Future Cancer Hospital. Again, Michael Hinchcliffe, principal with Payette, here on behalf of the proponents, Dana Farber and Beth Israel, along with Kevin Sullivan. Let me share my screen at this point. Let me make sure I get the right show. And if you could just confirm, everyone, that you are seeing my screen at this point.
All good.
Yes.
Perfect. So with that, we will begin our presentation this evening around the hospital connectors. At your request, what we've done is we've subdivided the overall scope of the project into 4 topics. As Seth said, this evening we're prepared to present to you 2 for review and discussion. The first, we'll switch this up, will be the hospital connectors, and then the second we'll cover will be the urban design in the public realm. We've then segregated out two other scopes, the park, so the Joslin Park design, as well as the overall building design for follow-up sessions, so that over the course of 4 meetings, we can comprehensively cover the very large scope for this project. So speaking specifically to the hospital connectors, what we'll do this evening is we'll talk about their context and function, give you a reminder of the scope of the project itself. We'll look, we have a summary of the alternative location studies that we performed. We have more detail in an appendix that we can go to for any one of those alternate studies. We then will talk about the Brookline Avenue Hospital connector, the Brookline Avenue Tunnel for context, as well as the Pilgrim Road connector. If that scope seems appropriate, we'll launch it. So first, the context and functional requirements. It's been a while since we talked about the overall project as a whole, but the 300-bed future cancer hospital will be divided along traditional organizational principles with a diagnostics and treatment base, mechanical levels above and below, an inpatient tower above. So that 300-bed inpatient tower has multiple units, whether that's in the intensive care unit or ICU, specialized cancer care, bone marrow transplants, or clinical trials or cell therapy beds. The diagnostics and treatment platform that's the base of the building has all or most of the support functions that are directly associated with the hospital, but not everything required for patient care. So in that platform, there's observational beds, multiple imaging modalities, the pharmacies, kitchens, and other support services. And it's the connectors at level 3 that are absolutely crucial to connecting the new hospital with the Dana-Farber campus, as well as the Beth Israel Deaconess campus. So hospitals of this size and complexity are part of larger networks. Unless we were in a standalone hospital in a community setting, it might be isolated, but the number of support services, the complexity of the cases, and just the efficiency of managing resources on large urban academic medical center campuses and special institutes like Dana-Farber require these linkages to allow patient care access to multiple locations, but moreover for safety as well. So the two connectors that we'll discuss tonight, the first is across Brookline Avenue to Dana-Farber's primarily ambulatory outpatient campus, and then the Brookline connector, Pilgrim Road connector to the inpatient functions and other specialized services at Beth Israel. So very specifically, the Brookline Avenue connector will serve as that intuitive, safe, dignified passageway for patients from Dana-Farber ambulatory settings to be admitted or move over to the cancer hospital across Brookline Avenue. As we've discussed in the IMP phase, the intuitive wayfinding and the low-stress transfer of a patient from one of their doctor's visits to either the observation beds or direct admission to the hospital is really the sole purpose of this connector across Brookline Avenue, to avoid costly ambulance transfers or other complicated, stressful ways of moving a patient just a single block away. The BI connector on Pilgrim Road serves a slightly different function. That's providing the clinical link from the emergency department, from operating rooms, for advanced imaging modalities, and other specialties through as an inpatient transfer to the cancer hospital. A very different, much more private, yet very important linkage from those critical hospital functions that occur on the West Campus to the future cancer hospital. Now, when we looked at locating these connectors for the function of the hospital and the specific location of the site, there were a few synergies that came into play that led us to these two locations, but that's not to say that we didn't look at a large number of alternates. We began looking at different locations within the overlap at locations 1 and 2 between the cancer hospital and the Dana and Mayer building, the Dana-Farber campus. There's also a tunnel that's proposed underground for other service or offstage connections between the two campuses. We looked at connections down at location 3, where there are ways to go directly from the Yawkey building over to the Rosenberg building and get into the system that way. They proved infeasible due to programmatic inconsistencies or restricted programs or locations in the Rosenberg building that we just couldn't tie into. We looked at other locations, whether that was above or below Joslin Park, for other ways of connecting the cancer hospital to Rosenberg, whether that was a series of bridges over the parks at upper levels or multiple locations for other tunnels. And every time we turned a corner there, we were met by obstacles from an infrastructure standpoint standpoint or a feasibility standpoint that were just unable to be overcome, whether that was multiple impacts or negative impacts to the public realm for multiple bridges or connectors over the park, or many utilities or the incompatible depths of buildings underground to connect those across in those locations. So we feel that after this study, that the locations that we're proposing of the Brookline connector and tunnel at locations 1 and 2, and then the Pilgrim connector really made the most sense, not only from an urban standpoint, but also from that patient safety and logical connections from the system itself. So let's talk a little bit about the Brookline connector. This is where we were. Kevin, I don't know if you want to jump in here and talk about how far we've come since the last time you saw it.
Sure. So the last time we presented this drawing of the connector, and it was what I'd call, even I think Seth used this word, as being bridge forward, where the connector is pushed to the face of the lower floors of the buildings, and the understory of the connector actually is set back from that. Now, if we go to the next slide, you'll see what we're proposing now is a building forward corner where the bridge is recessive. And you can see that now it's a very clear three-story high space that's facing the park as well as turning the corner. If we look at this in a little more detail, this change in alignment actually creates, I think, or we think, a slightly better interface with the Dana Mayer building. So on the left, you see the connectors hitting the middle of that opening, and that's with the sort of bridge forward. You can see a little bit of the overhang and the cantilever. And then with the bridge, the building forward scheme, actually the connector aligns with the entrance of Dana Mayer, and it creates a much simpler interface with the building and a much clearer hierarchy in terms of the way the entry works off of Brookline. Now, if we look at a couple other conditions, this is a cross section that's really showing what we're proposing, which is a very simple glass plane that's floating looking east and looking west. And actually the understory is an edge lit illuminated glass plane as well. So the idea is this is a very light and ephemeral assembly. On the inside, you do have the suspended wood slat ceiling. This is so that the patients actually who are on their backs are not getting the direct sunlight from above. And it's a really nice way to sort of actually enclose some of the mechanical systems as well. Now, as we look at this connector from a couple other vantage points, this looks in a little more detail at the interface with Dana Mayer and the new entrance. And then as we look both from the east and the west vantage, and this just shows a little bit the way it interfaces in a little more detail. Next. And then looking west, this is what the view would look like. You have the storefronts on your right, the connector going across the street, and then as we look in another vantage point, next, Michael. This will give you just sort of some of the dimensions across the street. So it's about 30 feet above the sidewalk. So you get that. It's 15'4" clear dimension, the full face of the connector, as well as you get a sense of the tunnel. Next. Now, as we look at this in comparison to the Liberty Mutual Bridge, you'll see that this connector is quite a bit higher at 31.5 feet tall, but it's very, very comparable in length in terms of the face dimension between the building faces. So, and this is finally the view looking east. So you get a sense of the Rosenberg building on one side, the Yawkey building, and then Boston and Fenway beyond. Now, Michael's going to talk about some of the tunnels and the other connectors.
Sure. Thanks very much, Kevin. So parallel to the Brookline Avenue Hospital connector above grade is a tunnel below grade. So when we look at this section, the two really serve distinct purposes. As I said earlier, the connector above is for patient transfer, so patients and their visitors and loved ones making their way between the ambulatory setting and the hospital. But below, at the level P2 level, is a proposed tunnel that would be used for offstage or other support functions. So the movement of controlled medical substances, specialized equipment, or some limited staff movement between the two buildings that really requires temperature control, but wants to be separate from the movement of the patients that are happening above grade. So this is, again, would be a tunnel that would move between the second level of the cancer hospital below Brookline Avenue, below the utilities, and connect in with the P2 level or the DL2 level of the Dana-Farber Dana Mayer Building campus. It is parallel to or at the same level as a number of utility connections that are separate that it would work its way through. It's slightly different from what we had proposed in the IMP, taking into account some new technical considerations of how to thread this tunnel, which would be a bored tunnel from the cancer hospital to Dana between foundations and underneath utilities. But it is serving a very separate function than the above grade connector that's really for patients and their families. In the time we have left, let's talk about the Pilgrim Road connector. So here we've had some discussion about how this Pilgrim connector is a separate entity from the hospital. It's really sitting at the head of Joslin Park, reframing this location to allow for the long-term construction of facilities that would replace the Deaconess and Libby building in the 15 to 20-year timeframe. But this connector would provide, again, those critical links for inpatient transfers from operating rooms and emergency departments. It would sit in front of the Deaconess building. You can see it here on the right. It's a building that's a little rough for the wear over years, and we hope that this connector provides a new way to organize the urban experiments in the public realm at grade and really control and better manage the visual environment around the park. We can return to some of these images in a second, but the intention here is that this connector is a part of the language that's begun to be established on the BI West campus that involves a rich texture of landscape and architecture at grade. This connector actually would begin at the Klarman building, which is at the corner of Francis Street, continue up Francis Street, and then link in. So in this split section, through this language of patient movement that begins at the corner of Pilgrim Road, with that as it crosses the existing bridge, begin to extend that language and provide a bit of visual continuity to their urban streetscape, as well as try to begin to establish a very clear language of the campus from BI's standpoint. Now, this connector in section would primarily sit clear of the roadway. So it would be cantilevered over the sidewalk, 16'6" minimum at the sidewalk. Its structural supports would be in a very shallow zone between the existing buildings and the sidewalk. Again, that would be to provide for the future replacement of those buildings. And the connector would then provide a shaded and covered walkway with an improved frontage zone that would hold the park, and then a bridge that would cross Pilgrim Road. Here, and we can return to these in a moment to talk a little bit about the section. Again, extrapolating and building upon the language that's been started at the Klarman building, we create a little bit more refined profile of this glazed connector that would slope gently from the third floor of the cancer hospital to the third floor of the Farr building. Now, we will note that what we do want to talk to you a little bit about is the routing for this bridge. Since the IMP proposal, what we're proposing is that the bridge would actually skew and cross Pilgrim Road at an angle. We looked at a number of different ways of crossing. At the IMP, we had an orthogonal crossing that made a very long bridge. What we're proposing after multiple studies to angle that to ease the patient movement, but also to visually separate the connector from the cancer hospital. There's a number of technical things that we can talk about. We looked at other routings through the buildings. We looked at some structural challenges here, but we feel that both from an architectural standpoint and a logistical standpoint, that this new connection makes sense. Returning though to the park view, which is really the most important here, this view taken from the park design that we'll discuss separately, stripping away the landscape now to see how this element sits in the landscape. We'd like to really read as holding the park from an urban perspective and providing a really rich understory almost at the street level. In these two views
And
here.
Michael, 2
Yes.
minutes.
Oh, thank you. Perfect timing. So in the view on the left, we have the connector. The idea is that we continue that language for seating landscape zones and some screened walls that would provide continuity as it cantilevers over the sidewalk. And then as it crosses, we would separate the language, and the crossing of Pilgrim Road would be very light and ethereal, connecting in from the more robust connector that holds the park, distinct from the language of the building itself. This is a very, again, similar connection, providing that direct comparison to the Liberty Mutual Bridge, again, over 20 feet above the roadway. It does span about 87 feet. So it is a complicated structural feat to do this, but we think that it improves the patient safety and transport as well as the condition. So here in summary are some views of that connector in context as it holds the park and really has a very distinct and separate architectural language from the rest of the project. So that concludes our overview of the connectors. As I said earlier, there's much overlap with the urban realm as well as the park, but we hope this provides context for you for how the design has evolved and the rationalization for the connector's function and location.
Thank you, Michael and team. Before I turn it, perfect timing. Before I turn it over to the commissioners, I just want to mention that I know there was a request to have the closed captioning turned on because of the technical difficulties we were having. We have not been able to do that, but the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our website. And if we can figure this out midstream, we will do so. I also want to recognize that Councillor Sharon Durkin is with us. And Councillor Durkin, I see your hand up if you'd like to say something before the commissioners begin discussing. And in typical format, after commissioners speak, we will then take general public testimony. And hold on, Councillor Durkin, I need to ask you to unmute.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to go out of order. I have an event tonight, but thank you so much to all of the work that has been put into this project. It's really exciting to see these updates. I wanted to comment specifically on the transportation improvements. I know I've been incredibly supportive of the project. I supported this at the BPDA board and then at the zoning commission. But I particularly wanted to mention some comments to this commission that I had mentioned at the BPDA board. I am really, and obviously I'm very in support of bike infrastructure and bus infrastructure throughout the city. But I want to make sure that we are not enshrining through this process anything that will need to be communicated to the community through the Fenway Transportation Action Plan, which I know has maybe potentially lost a little bit of steam because we don't have a full-time staffer working on it right now. But I know there's a lot of stakeholders in this process, and I am really excited to see the design changes here. And I have full trust in both the design team at the city and this commission. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands the context of the work with the Fenway Transfer Action Plan serves as a way to enhance resident voices, businesses, institution, and other stakeholders. And I think at this moment in time, and I think a lot of us that supported the initial IMP, we're looking to provide more feedback on that piece. So as the commission moves forward with conversations around a potential sky bridge and other transportation improvements, I just wanted to ask respectfully that you keep in mind that there is an active community process going on, and that I hope that that reaches additional stages before any decisions are enshrined by this commission on the transportation and street level side of this. So thank you so much. And again, I'm Sharon Durkin. I represent District 8, which includes the Longwood area.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any other elected officials with us this evening or representatives of? Okay, and commissioners, I will turn it back to you.
Thanks, Seth. So commissioners, who wants to start this discussion? Maybe I'll start with a question, and I really do apologize. I've just been in the background trying to deal with some of the Zoom requests and technical issues. Can you just describe for me the difference between the activity of the tunnel? I know that the third floor connector over Brookline Ave is a patient tunnel, but the one underneath is utilities, or can you just quickly describe that again?
Sure, Mimi. So the intention of the separation of the bridge versus the tunnel in hospital design and operation, there are two terms that that might make sense: on stage and off stage. On stage is anything that has to do with patients and their families and loved ones and caregivers, and the above grade connection is really focused on that transfer. So a patient that might be in a clinic who is referred by their physician to the observation room or is going to be admitted to the hospital, they would use that on-stage connection so that an intuitive wayfinding in daylight at the third floor to make their way independently from any of the Dana-Farber campus back to the cancer hospital, or vice versa, that a patient or a loved one might use that connection above the street level to make their way to other resources at the Dana-Farber campus. The tunnel is really intended for off-stage materials and transports. So being down at the DL2 level, that's intended for supplies or controlled medical goods or medical equipment or materials that might need to be moved from one of the loading docks or areas that are located on the Dana-Farber campus through that tunnel to the cancer hospital. Given the complex logistics, the separation of that offstage or dirty circulation would occur at the lower levels. That might be, again, medical supplies or materials coming from one of the loading docks, or that could be medication that might have been prepared in a laboratory or holding area in the campus and moved in a controlled fashion below grade across the building. There are utilities as well that are planned to go through the below grade connection that might include specialized transportation systems, pneumatic tubes, or other communication systems that link the two campuses together. But it's really thought of like front of house, back of house for the separation there above and below grade.
Thank you. That's helpful. Anne Marie, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for your presentation. Could you go back to the slide where that describes the alternatives for the pedestrian bridges? And I guess I'll
Sure.
add to this. I think I'm most concerned about the bridges over Pilgrim Road, including the cantilever over the sidewalk. And I just, I'd like to understand a little bit more about the decision to locate the bridge over Pilgrim, where you did, or the bridges, versus Joslin Place and Deaconess. And that's one question. And then the second question is, you've referred to them as being light and ethereal, but in the renderings, they look dark and heavy to me. So if you could just discuss, some of your rationale. I understand, you explained that there's an interest in sort of unifying or coming up with the sort of an architecture that is consistent, but it looks, again, it just appears heavy to me. And I guess I just in general have the most concern over particularly the skewed bridge over Pilgrim Road.
Sure. Just to restate, I'll talk a little bit about the location and the logic and function of the bridge, and then Kevin, maybe I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit about the architecture and the intent. So first off, Anne-Marie, the real goal of the Pilgrim Connector is providing a seamless link from the emergency department and operating rooms that are in the Klarman and the Rosenberg buildings in the fastest route possible over to the cancer hospital. So on the screen here, I have to turn my head, apologize for this. So there's the existing bridge across Pilgrim Road that ties into a vertical circulation core in the FAR building. So moving through that core, The goal is to provide that seamless link to the Rosenberg from FAR, Rosenberg through FAR to the cancer hospital. I'll go to that alternatives slide that shows this in a little bit more detail about the routing that we looked at. So we looked at whether or not we could go through or into the Deaconess building. That was our first point of departure. So could we get into that building? Could we make our way without this large connector? And there were two things that came into play there. The first is a level change. So we're coming from elevation, from a slightly higher elevation at the cancer hospital 3rd floor that ties in with the whole 3rd floor network at Dana-Farber. The bar in Rosenberg is about 4'6" lower than that. So to come right into Deaconess, we would be at a mid-level, taking out essentially 2 floors of program to try and enter that building and make a grade change down directly into the FAR building. There's a number of site utilities there, as well as programs in the Deaconess building that are incompatible with through transit. We would really destroy those departments if we tried to put a corridor through them to bring patients from the emergency room through the Deaconess building into the hospital. The second was to think from long-term planning. So we wanted to be able to locate this connector so that when a BI is able to replace the Deaconess and Libby building, that this connector could stay in place for that construction and be able to provide that uninterrupted link from the emergency department into the hospital. So that drove this sectional situation. Let me bring up the section right now, where we tried to create a wide enough connector that was wide enough for safe transported patients. Now, this might be a patient that's coming from surgery that has a large team with them, so it's a relatively wide connector, but there was a very narrow zone where we could put the structure. So that's why it's balanced halfway on the property line and half of it extending over the sidewalk or the pedestrian zone. And then within that reach, the thickness of the connector on the bottom is really the poche, where the ramp is making a sloped connection from the higher elevation at Pilgrim down to FAR. Now the routing, let me go back to this drawing here of what we studied. On the left, going from left to right, this is where we are right now with a very gentle, eased connection that passes across the road at an angle. At the IMP, we were at this 90-degree relationship where we crossed the road and at a perpendicular location. And then it was much longer in position across the sidewalk in front of the Libby building. That study that we looked at, could we go directly into Deaconess and not have the connector? It just didn't work. When we started to talk to patient safety as well as look at the structure, the hard right angle turns of coming through the connector and crossing the bridge here made us look at, is there a way to ease this connection and make it both more elegant at the streetscape, but also on the inside? We tried to see if we could move that bridge south closer to the intersection, but there's some key staircases in the cancer hospital that we can't move, so it's really driving the location of the connection at the hospital. So that led us to this really easy transition for patient movement in the building as well as into the connector that allowed us to frame the built connection nicely within the aperture of the park and use that then for that gentle, very easy slope down to connect into the FAR building at that location there. So there's a number of factors that were at play to try and evolve this crossing. Now, we know that an angled crossing across the street is counterintuitive from an urban perspective, but we feel that it pulls the bridge back from the park's facade and is still a relatively clean way of crossing Pilgrim, which is a very low volume street that's basically a service road. So let me clear my drawings and then Kevin, you want to talk
Michael,
about the
I might, if you
section.
just keep this here for a sec.
Yeah.
There was one other thing on option 1, which was if we took the connector straight across to the Libby building, there was no place to put structure down at that location. There was a minefield of utilities and below grade things in that whole area. So it was also structurally nearly impossible to do that. Okay, but to talk about the architecture, there were some comments about the ethereal nature of the connector and how these two maybe differed. We are thinking very differently about the Brookline Ave connector and the connector that's coming from the new cancer hospital connecting to the the Pilgrim connector. Those are the ones that are, floating planes of glass, very light. The connector that's along Pilgrim is taking some cues from the connector that's already there, coming from the Clarnham building. And so it's not quite as heavy as this, and that we're still putting a very delicate frame around a glass plane, but it's very much like a building that's framing the end of the park. So it has a slightly different character than, for example, the Brookline connector and that angled connector that Michael was talking about. It also is not transparent on the backside of it because it's up against some buildings. And that's part of the reason, why it looks differently, but it actually is very much in keeping with the connector that's on the opposite side of the street that's going between the Rosenberg building, the Far Bridge, and the Claremont building. So we're really looking to have a cohesive streetscape and then a very definitive face and urban room, if you will, that's facing the park. So this might be a place where patients or staff might stop and sit along the way from to and from. And we're thinking that there might even be niches along this that are like some of the niches that we have in the existing Claremont connector. So it becomes part of the tapestry of spaces that connect the institution as well. So it's very much thinking about the urban realm, but it's also thinking about those spaces in the continuity of experience as you walk through the BIDMC complex. So I hope
Thank you.
Mimi, I'm having trouble. Somehow there's a new Zoom material here, and there's no way for me to identify that I'd like to have my hand raised.
Yeah.
Am I missing something in the new layout?
That happens occasionally, but please go ahead if you're ready to weigh in.
If someone's ahead of me.
No. I don't think so.
Okay. I apologize, but let me just back up a little. And the presentation is very clear. We appreciate it a lot. In many ways, from an urban design point of view and city building point of view, it's the Brookline Avenue Bridge which has the most impact on the daily life of hundreds of thousands of Bostonians. And so it strikes me that we might spend some real focus time on that bridge with any questions we might have. And then the Pilgrim Road Bridge or bridges are secondary, although I think your point that it's slightly heavy looking at the head of the park is a valid one, and we can come to that. Let me just ask a point of information question. Is there a connection between this network of bridges with Dana-Farber and the new cancer building? Are they connected to the walkway and bridge system on the other side of Longwood that the hospital has created over the years?
Yes, they are, Bill. So the third floor network at Dana-Farber does tie in through across Binney Street to the Jimmy Fund building. And there it ties in through a bridge to the Pike at Brigham, as well as a connection to Children's Hospital. So Dana-Farber's current inpatients connections are through that network to the Brigham, as well as through that same network over Binney Street for their pediatric care at Children's Hospital. But it's all at the same third floor.
But does that also connect to the BI network of walkways at the third level headed east of
No, no. So there's no interconnection to the East Campus. So across Longwood Avenue, there's no connection between the two campuses.
And is that indeed the long-range plan?
To my knowledge, there's no long-range plan to connect the two campuses.
And why wouldn't, I mean, just it seems like an obvious question to ask. I mean, it deserves a longer answer.
It is a good question, Bill. I don't know if Jared's on here, but it's beyond our scope or the means right now of both campuses. I think the current goal of getting the cancer hospital, and the Dana-Farber and the Beth Israel West campus connection is the focus. I'm sure it's for another generation, given the speed and the means of the two campuses to evolve to address that bigger question of north-south across Longwood Avenue.
Then maybe I'd turn to Seth. What is the city's point of view on that lack of connection?
I would say that we entertain connections only when proponents bring them to us as a sort of operational imperative. As in general, we would like to limit the number of connections that go above grade over the public right of way.
Well, I mean, I know this hospital and I know the Brigham and the Pike at the Brigham. You know, those for the general public are important connections. It seems to me to have in our minds as we're looking at the future, and so I would ask that we have some sense of the rationale for the lack of having Beth Israel having two unconnected networks is something that worrisome. That said, let me just personally, and having been involved in this whole bridge issue in the BCDC for many, many years, I think everyone has come around to the point of view that having effective and easy to understand bridge connections are important for the patients of these hospitals and are also important for public visitors and or public users of the buildings. And so it seems to me that the bridge over Brookline, we should be looking at quite carefully from a design point of view. There's a piece of me which is supportive of this bridge that we're looking at, but it still seems heavier than it might be, and I would love to know the rationale for that from a design point of view.
So Bill, part of I think you're stumbling into some issues that I think we're having with some renderings that are very preliminary, which are like this one here. And then Michael, if you could show the one
Sure.
that's a little bit more the overview of the whole thing, which is a little more polished. And then this is closer to what we're trying to do. Where these other ones, I agree with you. They're a little clumsy the way they were rendered. And if Michael, if you just go to the detail,
Sure.
I think I want to talk about that because the intention is that it's a very simple flush glass plane that is essentially floating and with, butt glazing in between, and that any either structure or thickness is behind that glass plane and handled almost like a shadow box, but even less so. So you can see that here in the section, and that the ceiling for the connector 2 is a glass plane that would be illuminated. So we're actually trying not to have any sort of opaque surface on that outer surface. The only thing that alludes to opacity is you see there's this rainwater collector that we're trying to collect some of the runoff from the bridge. So if that was, if we didn't have to have that per se, we could float that glass plane beyond there. But we actually think this is probably a good detail in terms of, issues with the street and dripping and stuff like that. But the intention is this is a very sort of light system where the interior structure is disengaged from the glass surface.
So I applaud that, and I would just urge that at the next session, we might get some new renderings to
Absolutely.
the intentional lightness that you're doing. And my only comment on Pilgrim Way is, I'm sure I'm going to step on toes when I say that, but Pilgrim Way is less impactful on the city's urban realm than is Brookline Ave. And so I think to let Brookline Avenue be wagging the tail on this is important. Not the tail, the head.
Mm-hmm.
The head is really important. And at the same time, we'll let others discuss the Pilgrim Way details. But does Pilgrim Way have the bridges there? Are they more internal, or if the public uses them too? Doesn't?
So the existing bridge that spans multiple stories across Pilgrim Way between the Rosenberg and Farr connection, I believe it's primarily back of house connection, so patient movement, staff movement on the upper floors. I'm not sure if there's a direct public connection at the lower floor there. I believe that it is all sort of behind closed doors, patient and staff circulation for all levels of those bridges. So moving patients back and forth from the ORs to their bedrooms.
Thank you.
All right, Shauna?
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but Michael, could you just clarify that last statement? So is the lowest level of the current bridge over Pilgrim tied into this network, either presently or planned in the future?
So the lowest, the third floor of the existing Pilgrim Bridge would tie in with this network. That would be the level of connection for patients from the emergency department or the surgeries across the third floor into this network. I don't know if that is currently a public connection at the third floor within the Beth Israel network. I can maybe Jared or someone can clarify on that. But the intention is that the third floor of that existing connector would form the link across Pilgrim from the Farr building to the Rosenberg-Klarman context.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Shauna.
No, that's fine. Seth and Michael and Kevin, thank you for the presentation. I don't disagree with Bill about the significance and importance of thinking of the fine detailing for Brookline, but I am pretty uncomfortable with the Pilgrim experience. We can just go back to the Pilgrim one. That's really all I want to talk about. The first clarifying question I wanted to understand about Pilgrim is, what is the height and the time duration of this project? When the buildings behind it are removed, will the walkway be incorporated within the building? So is this just a temporary bridge, or is the idea that this bridge continues beyond the time frame of the building replacements behind it?
Sure. So will this have a life longer than the current condition? So in speaking with Beth Israel, they don't know yet. I think we're locating it in a way that it could be extended to form a longer network along Pilgrim Road to connect in future development with this network, or if that would be replaced by another internal network that would link in a different way over time. I think we're in the 15 to 20 year range before those the existing buildings would be replaced for it to come. But what we do know is that this will be here for the duration of the project and sometime thereafter. So we're considering it as Kevin said, as an extension of that existing language at the street for what we know might at least be 10 to 15 years.
Because for me, that's a pretty critical question to understand, because I think I feel when you're in that area at the end of Joslin Park, looking both directions, all three directions, I feel like you're kind of being encircled and enclosed with these bridges on all three sides of you in a not very large space. And then underneath the other bridges is quite constricted. So understanding that the long term, that this may, it's very different if I'm looking at this as a short term, being 15 years kind of thing, or a much longer term condition, because if you're cantilevering over the sidewalk, you're obviously not going to be able to infill, underneath the bridge, which, making it a building coming all the way down. So that was really the reason for asking that question. I guess I would also like to understand, given for me, the discomfort is in the proportion of space underneath it is almost the same height as the bridge because the bridge just has a building effect to it. It's almost the same height as the building itself. So I think that may be where some of the heaviness is, but it's really for me, the most significant thing is the cantilevering condition over the sidewalk with not very much height and quite a large mass on top. I see, maybe 16, 15 feet or something, but outside we all know that feels pretty low. So I'd like to understand more about the impossibility of pushing it in, because you had said that was sort of a non-starter. I'm sure that the height of this the floor-to-floor height of this doesn't appear to be the same as the floor-to-floor height of the building, but I'd like to understand that study more.
Sure. Let me bring up this plan here, and I can zoom in. Oh, sorry. I don't want to get anyone sick. I hit the wrong button here. So let me go back to this drawing and zoom in a little bit to give you a little bit better dimensional understanding. So we've worked very, very carefully to have the face of the connector align with the face of the curb to provide that minimum of 16.6 clear. The ground does slope away, so that 16.6 is only at the top of the slope, and then the roadway does slope gradually down toward the riverway to the south. We've nestled the connector in as tight as we can against the Deacon S building, and its width is really determined by patient safety. So knowing that this is a route for patients that are being accompanied to and from surgery, they will be on a bed or a stretcher with potentially equipment with them and a large team. So we've tried to maintain at least 8 to 9 or even 9 feet clear at structure, and then wider at those niches that Kevin was talking about. So it's really the width for the safe patient transfer to and from the operating rooms with a large equip of people that set the width of the connector. That's a limiting factor between the face of Deacon S and that curb line. So moving from the cancer hospital on the right of the page to the left, so there's those eased movements, so those very gentle slopes, so that someone wheeling a bed with a patient on it makes that slow turn either directly into the observation unit from the emergency department or through the corridor into the patient transfer elevators. And then again, we've eased the connection in the back here so that there's that little niche space that Kevin talked about that becomes an eddy or a place of respite on the pathway, but also to turn the corners into the system. So when I go back to that section, Shauna, let me just go back one, or I think it's forward here. That what you're seeing here is the thickened condition that's separate from the step out in the face of Deacon S. And the goal really is that the frontage zone would be improved with a lush and rich landscape and benches and on that Corten screening wall to create an environment that really feels like an extension of the park. So almost like you're under a porch or a loggia, able to be a part of that experience. But I do hear your criticism that the space above and below at this section is relatively equal.
So Michael, if you could go back to the plan, I was more wondering about the possibility of a partial demolition of Deacon S to push it back. into the plane of the building facade. I
Yeah,
know that's complicated given an existing building, but I think if we're thinking of this, if your immediate answer had been this is a 10 to 15 year project, we'll just sort of muscle through. But given that this is the potential long-term streetscape, I would like to I'd like to understand the possibility or impossibility of
Sure.
pushing it more coplanar with
So
the building.
Shauna, can I ask a question? If you
Yeah.
go to the diagrams, you're describing
Oh.
level or option
Oh,
0, I believe.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
what you want to understand. Yeah, and I honestly have very much the same question. Like you said it was impossible, but without describing why. And so if
Sure.
you could just tell us what happens in that building and what you would be displacing if you did that, because I also think you're giving that interior quality of space a much more diminished quality of space by putting the bridge in front of it. So just give us a little bit, really, insights into that.
Sure, I will do my best. I don't know if you might want to promote Jared Dorr, who, if I misspeak, with my potentially limited knowledge of the inner workings of Beth Israel, he can back me up on this. But when we studied it, the first is Shauna, that push and pull is really real here. So I think from our location where it is right now, the ability to have it as tight to the street really provides the long-term ability for the replacement buildings to maximize the site. So if we were to push it in and remove, say, a swath of the facade of Deaconess, it would limit the long-term not only the long-term development of the site, but also the logistics of how to construct on that structure by taking more of the site day one without knowing what that might need to be in 15 to 20 years. When we did look at going through the building, knowing how tight Beth Israel is on space, that there's mental health spaces, there are psychiatric units that are there. I think there's some cardiovascular units on the 4 floors of Deaconess, that to be able to remove that much program from a very tight space and either temporarily or permanently find new locations on the campus was cost prohibitive and logistically prohibited for Beth Israel within their system. They're really looking to save every dollar they can for patient care, and this compromise that we found of utilizing as much as we could of the Beth Israel land on the property line, and really this slight cantilever over the sidewalk seemed to find the balance between a really good way of unifying the streetscape today, but also saving the right amount of space for the future. And hopefully I got that right, Jared, with the programs that are in Deaconess.
You did describe it well. It would affect the flow of the floor, but more importantly, I think it would affect the 4th floor inpatient mental health beds that we have that are 20. We have 24 beds in the city, and I think everybody knows that we're in a crunch for mental health beds in the city of Boston as a whole and in Massachusetts and across the country. The 3rd floor has support spaces for mental health as well, so this would have a very big impact on patient care in the city of Boston. So, and there's a flow too with quarter wise going into FAR, where we have our some of our cardiology areas that it would affect as well. So it has a cascading event. That's why we put it proud in preparation for, in future. And, we say 15 years, it could be 20, could be 25 years. We don't know. It depends on, how things progress, but it's definitely not in the 11 to 12 year range. It's out there to be able to replace those buildings, because we're going to have to make sure that we account for the behavioral health beds in the city of Boston first. That's a really big issue.
And I understand, and absolutely, that's 100%. That is a super high priority, very, very critical issue. I understand the importance of all of your missions, but certainly of the mental health missions. I still, however, am not comfortable with giving over the cantilever cantilevering entirely over the public sidewalk. I know you're saying you're skinning it down, but you are completely covering the public sidewalk with the building. And I think given the proximity of the two bridges on either end, I do think it's not creating an ideal long-term or even a comfortable long-term condition for the city as well as your your patients, the visitors, the people who are working there. So it's an elegant box. I actually think it feels more like a building. I would actually love it to come down to the ground more, but that view at the end of the park of the floating mass, and then the views looking down the street, it doesn't, even this is a beautiful rendering, of course, lovely trees. It still feels pretty cramped and uncomfortable underneath that cantilever.
We will pass it on to Anne
Yeah,
Marie.
yeah, I'll move.
Yeah.
And then you can come back, Shauna. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
no,
a discussion.
Yeah,
I-
and maybe this will help, because I just want to, I think I raised the question to begin with, and I really have concerns about this. And you refer to the idea of it being a loggia, and I think if it is intended to be that, then design it that way. I think it's sort of the way it's represented. Unlike the Brookline Avenue Bridge, which is sort of secondary to the architecture, the Pilgrim Avenue is actually quite dominant, and I think needs to be treated as architecture. I don't think it reads heavily. It is going to have an impact on the space, and I think Shauna raised a really great point about what's the experience. As we've been reviewing this project, there's been such an emphasis on Joslin Park, and what's the quality of being in the space, and how does the architecture frame that space? And I would really like to see, I guess I'm struggling because I really am concerned about the skewed bridge. I'm concerned about the overhang over the public way. If we have no choice but to approach it this way, then I would like to see some different architectural approaches to it, because I just am not convinced that I also just sort of question the quality of that space. Shauna will know better, but I would like to understand what it would feel like under that space. To what extent will vegetation be lush in that space? And just as I think about what are some great examples of covered walkways, how can you draw upon those to create a special place rather than trying to remedy an overhang?
Anne Marie, I have a question for you all. Michael and I are definitely hearing, because we've been, one of the things on the team, we've been sort of, we're in between this end of the park being a building and a bridge, and we're sort of not exactly in either place, So maybe a little more definitive stance at the end of the park where we try some options where it reads more like a building. And let me give you just an example that'd be easy to sort of understand tonight and understand there are other options that we could do. One of the things that creates that sort of big sort of cantilevered zone is the decision of where we put that screen wall. There's this Corten screen wall that's behind the columns right now. You can get a sense of it right there. Where that wall is placed, how far back it is placed, and what is that, the layering could change this relationship in terms of what the perceived depth of that is, or that area in front of the street. And so that's like one of the things, the discussions that we've had as a design team is that a building wall that's meant to be seen purely as a building that has this sort of delicate veiling, so that when there are the perception of windows, these openings align with some of the windows on the Deaconess building, but also it's perforated. Light comes through it. So when you're on the other side of it, on the inside, you sense the whole view. We could also investigate having it be a surface that things grow on. We're not really showing it exactly like that right now. It's more of a building. And I'm just bringing this up. We could play with where that plane is so that the cantilever doesn't appear quite so monolithic. And we can play with the ends of this building to make it appear in some way to sort of hit the ground a little more meaningfully than it does right now. So this idea of loggia and other things, we could articulate more fully. But the main thing is that back plane, if I put it in front of the columns, you have a very different perception of that space. And Michael, I don't know if you want to add anything, but that's just a discussion we've had it in the office with the team, and we've been talking about.
Yeah, let me I'll bring this up for context because I know Shauna, you were questioning like the space, but we do as both the inside and the outside in the section very close through. We're trying to navigate this slope on the interior, but also as it does increase below. We're not showing the screen here in this section. So one of the things we are sort of thinking about is how the bottom of the bridge interacts with a ramp, but how we provide a sort of stable facade to the park that helps mitigate the changes that have to happen below for patient movement.
And are those vertical elements structural?
Yeah,
supports?
so as Kevin alluded to earlier, this is we have 3 locations where we can needle through the existing web of utilities to support the connector. Part of this is to provide a clear space for the future, but it's really the only place that we can go through. So at the southernmost point, we'll be going through an old sort of storage rooms to provide a new structural support. And LeMessurier, our structural engineers, have worked up a truss system where we can span from this support to 2 potential column locations that are able to go between some utilities, and then that truss support cantilevers north to receive the bridge that then spans between the cancer hospital and the future structure. So there's a lot of gymnastics that we're trying to conceal here, which is part of the challenge as well of maintaining that 8-foot clear above that we need to provide for the health code for patient movement, but also a rather robust structure that we're trying to conceal to make this appear as light and elegant as possible, with only really three points of contact with the ground.
And so in no way does it touch the Deaconess building. It's completely independent.
Correct. It is completely structurally independent, so that in the future the connector can remain, the Deaconess building can be removed, and construction activities for the future expansion there can take place. So it's completely independent structurally and mechanically from Deaconess.
Yeah, I was not part of the commission when the discussion of bridges in the in the medical district, the importance of the comfort of communication between buildings. This is pushing it because this isn't a bridge. This is basically not building a building. Building something in front of a building as a temporary fit, as a long-term, but somewhat, but quick fix for a long-term solution. And I'm not, just from a pedagogical perspective, taking over the public sidewalk, cantilevering over the public sidewalk is something that I don't feel is a good precedent to. I think it's an elegant solution, although I do have big issues with its proportion. It feels heavier. The bridge or loggia or whatever it is feels higher than what is below it. But just from the perspective of the public realm, setting precedent to cantilever completely over the public sidewalk is something I'm very uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, Shauna, I will agree with you there. And Kevin, I wish it was as subtle as to where the screen is below that supports the whole bridge. It's not in my mind. this is very hard challenge for you guys. I really, really, you know, in a way don't envy the tough problem that you have. And I do think you guys are being really creative about solving it. But I just also have a really tough, you know, I just don't understand how you could disrespect the Deaconess building so much. I'm not saying it's necessarily a gem, but it is there and it has windows, and you're now blocking windows to that building. I don't understand, you know, how you can do that to the Deaconess buildings and leave this condition for 20 to 25 years.
But-
So
Mimi, my concern is not even the 20 to 25 years, because this could be the condition going forward, that there's another building that goes behind it, and
exactly.
we've got this.
Exactly. And I'm just curious if does Landmark weigh in on this project because it's so close to the Deaconess? I don't know.
Just to address that question, if I'm not mistaken, Deaconess isn't an individually listed landmark building. So it does not have landmarks protection in the traditional sense. It would go through, well, because this is structurally independent, there's no demolition delay here
Right.
with this structure either. I would say that, you know, because what they are proposing is above a public right of way, right, that the Public Improvements Commission definitely has jurisdiction here. And this is lower than and over the public right of way more than they would traditionally allow for. Obviously, this is a very unique circumstance and proposal, but for obstructions such as canopy and others, this exceeds that. They have not officially weighed in, but PIC has jurisdiction. Of course, the planning department has jurisdiction here. This is within 100 feet of Boston Parks, so Parks would be reviewing this as well, and BTD because this is over a roadway. So there's many other layers of review from other city departments that will also have to be factored in here.
Yeah, maybe I know we're running late and we have a whole other presentation. You know, that section was illuminating because I realized there was a ramp inside, but I didn't realize how much you were ramping to increase the overall height of this volume. So I think that's something, if you could think about presenting other scenarios to minimize height, what would that look like? And then I just curious if there's any way if the angled bridge is problematic regardless, just because it's not at a 90 degree, it's at an angle. But I am wondering if the impact is reduced if it's to the left of the stair rather than to the right of the stair, because you're increasing the overall length. So I do think that there's a few studies that you could come back with, you know, can the architecture read more like a loggia? Is there a way to minimize the overall impact? Are there other massing, you know, solutions you've tried, given still the overall concern of covering the sidewalk is a big concern. But maybe there's other studies that you can come back to the commission with. And I do have a question about Brookline Ave, and I'm just going to ask the question because you raised a thought in my mind when you said, well, the ceiling can't be glass because of the patient's comfort, you know, when they're lying in bed. And you have the tunnel connection, which is a stage off connection. And I'm just wondering, could there ever be a scenario where this is stage on, stage off right next to each other in a tunnel condition? And it's honestly a question that I have because the impact over a bridge over Brookline Avenue is pretty significant. I completely understand the network of bridges in the hospital area, and I, you know, do think that they're needed, but I just have to ask that question.
Are you saying, Mimi, to sort of flip the relationship, or
What I'm saying is put them side
Yeah.
by side in
I see.
a tunnel condition.
Yeah, so we did talk extensively with both institutions about if all of the connections could be below grade to have that on stage, off stage next to each other. And one of the first things that came out is the different nature of how patients are moving from Dana-Farber to the Future Cancer Hospital than from Beth Israel. So this above grade connection that's proposed is really the closest in alignment with the connection between the ambulatory care that's being given in the Dana-Farber buildings and the inpatient care. So it's really a transition mode. Most patients will be walking from the Dana-Farber complex unaccompanied to the hospital in a transfer. Some may be brought over by wheelchair, but it's really providing the ability for their independent wayfinding from the clinics or ambulatory settings over to the hospital without needing to put them in an ambulance and take them there. So that the intuitive daylight, as few elevator transfers as possible, really pushes this connection to the third floor. If we were to move that connection below grade, we looked at the route and in this most stressful time of being transferred from what you think is an appointment into an inpatient stay, to make your way through several elevator changes, not only on Dana-Farber campus side, then underground, but then back above grade to the cancer hospital side, was really seen as very, very stressful and counterintuitive from a healthcare delivery perspective. That best standard of care is really to provide that daylight connection at the third floor and separate the two.
All right,
If that
then
makes sense.
that makes sense. I just had to ask the
Yeah.
question, but it would be
You
nice
did
to
too.
see, a section to see if you're overall increasing the height of the bridge over Brookline Ave to mitigate different elevations in the buildings, just like we saw along Pilgrim Road.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had a section of that bridge over Brookline Ave that had a cavity. It's called out for utilities, and I was just curious if that could be minimized. I think,
Yeah,
effectively making that bridge as tight as possible and,
totally.
short as possible is my goal.
That one of the if anything, level 3 became our Rosetta Stone. So the Brookline Avenue Bridge, and partly what's driving the slope over at Far, is that the third floors are keyed into the same elevation. So the third floor of the Future Cancer Hospital is at the same floor elevation as the third floor of Dana, of Yawkey, of Smith, of all those bridges that connect the whole network. So that level
They're perfectly level.
yeah. And so we are working with a measure to try and at the bottom reduce the box girder height. So it's totally self-supporting. So all the structure is below the walking surface, so that above is the insulated assembly to meet the energy code and to keep the ceiling as thin as possible. What Kevin described as the gutters that were promoting as integral that allowed us to make the top thinner. So the last time you saw it, we had probably another 18 inches in height at the top of the connector. And since we've moved to incorporate those the gutters at the base, we've been able to make the ceiling and the roof assembly a lot lighter and more delicate.
That sounds great. So I think that's all moving in the right direction. My question is that box girder utility pathway in this illustration is empty, but I see ducts and conduits in the section below. And I'm just wondering, can all of this be compressed more?
We will absolutely work with the measure and BR+A to ask that question and see what we can do.
And with respect to the loggia, as you know, you can obviously know I'm very uncomfortable with it as a precedent, but if so, I would support looking at it more as a building rather than a floating, very, very heavy object.
Okay, so Michael, we'll take the comments and we'll come back with some additional thoughts and progress on Pilgrim, and we can also report on how some of the detailing is coming along Brookline, because our goal is certainly to make that as thin and light as we can.
Yeah, and to that effect, I saw a dimension of 12.3 on the Brookline Avenue Bridge, and I just want to make sure we're, you're making the the loggia, we'll call it the loggia bridge, functional, but as minimal in dimension as it possibly can be.
Okay.
Something else I'd love
Yeah.
just to understand more. And it looks like there's maybe structure coming along the backside, and so a little bit more understanding of how the structure works might be helpful.
Sure.
And also
Yeah, we've
understanding,
got some,
and
yeah, we can share more
yeah.
later.
Yeah, and understanding the relationship to Deaconess exactly, to that, a very tight section through that.
So clearly a lot that we can, that we'll study and return to you with some more on Pilgrim Road.
And I'd just like to add to, you know, understanding, I'd like to actually see some sections through the building and the proposed pedestrian bridge at Pilgrim Road to understand, to better understand the relationship, you know, as Mimi was discussing, you know, what's the impact on the interior spaces? You know, you've described what's on the inside, but we don't know what's on the inside. And I'd also like to understand the, you know, the surface treatment. You know, again, this is architecture, this isn't incidental. So how do, you know, what is the, you know, how do all the pieces, how are all the pieces integrated? The face of the building, what is it like as a pedestrian to be in that space? What is happening on the wall of the existing building? I think this is all going to be really critical to making a convincing argument for this bridge.
And I would also, you know, of course, don't you, I would just think deeply, is there another solution? Because yeah, I mean, I think you can make a beautiful object. It already is beautiful in itself, but is there a better, bigger idea that has a more advantageous impact to the public realm in the long term? Because we're not thinking, you know, this isn't, this is at least a 25-year thing that we're looking at right now. And it sounds like it's probably longer. So I'd just put that out there.
Okay.
Okay, commissioners, if unless there are any other comments on the bridge, perhaps we can have the proponent go into the second part of the presentation, take additional commissioner comments, then open it up for public comment before we turn it back to the commission for next steps.
So with that, Seth, we'll go on to the urban realm.
Please.
Okay. Now ready for part two. The urban realm. What we'd like to do this evening with this portion is to talk about the context for the building itself, how it meets the street, look at the connections and transparency, porosity, streetscape improvements around the building itself. What we will do is give you a brief orientation again to the context of the building itself. We'll go around the building street by street at grade to give you an understanding of what's happening where, what the proposal is for along Brookline Avenue, Joslin Place, and Pilgrim Road. And then at the end, knowing how close things are in terms of the design perspective, we'll give you a little bit of a preview for what we're talking about with the Parks Commission regarding Joslin Park for upcoming commission meetings. So Kevin, I think we glossed over this, but there has been some changes to the building itself, not to ignore.
Yeah, so we've been working on the overall massing. We certainly talked about the plane of where the sort of main space at the lobby was relative to the connector, but above grade, you'll notice that we're continuing to refine the skin, and so you're going to see that there are these pressure caps that are starting to sort of articulate portions of the facade to give it a little more scale. And the detailing at the base of the building as we're going to go around is going to change quite a bit. We have this terracotta facade that's going to wrap along Pilgrim, and the idea is that it's very porous and that you can sense the occupied space behind, and it gives it a very rich texture. So we'll take you through some of this as we walk our way around.
So I do apologize. We had thought we would start here with this presentation. So we did capture what we heard from you in full committee to address in terms of what we're covering in the urban realm and other areas. Clarifying the human scale and texture, the vocabulary, this focus around the first two levels, as well as understanding what amenities exist and addressing these in a logical fashion. One of the things that we were keeping in mind as the building developed were those really great design guide frameworks that we developed with your input as a part of the IMP process. So how do we react in terms of our adjacency to open space? How do building entries meet the public way? How do the canopies that are required for the healthcare occupancies provide shelter for building occupants, but also provide amenity on the public streets? Are there views or connections with the interior? And when we're not able to be transparent to the interior, how do opaque facades enrich and enliven the public realm and the very critical first 30 feet of vertical distance to the building, whether it's through texture, landscape, or controlled transparency to program when available. To make sure that we have this in context, and this is in a way was anticipating the comments from the commissioner, from the councilman earlier this evening, that there are additional projects that are happening along Brookline Avenue as a part of the IMP process that we're working very closely with Seth and other departments on the city around Brookline Avenue and those offsite improvements. But today we'll focus specifically on the project itself. In this, let me go back, sorry for a bit of a delay here. So for clarity on this previous slide, everything in orange is highlighted as a part of the project scope itself. From the intersection safety improvements in the upper left-hand corner of Pilgrim Road, we'll focus today around the building itself and the block, and then in the future meeting around around Joslin Park, with then separate work with the city for the Brookline Avenue transit improvement. We have sections, but we can credential
Michael,
it.
I don't know if it's just my computer, but I'm still on the next steps
Yeah,
slide.
Michael.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean. I thought it was just me.
Sorry, let me just make sure, let me restop my share and start again and make sure if
I think we missed a whole bunch, didn't we?
Yeah, you may have. Thanks for letting me know. I apologize. Okay, so let's go to the urban realm.
Yeah, Michael, I guess it turns out I was commenting on an image that wasn't even the one you were presenting.
All right. Let me swap views, reshare. So we should have a site plan with some key annotations for ground floor activities.
Yes.
Okay. Let me back up one then to make sure that we cover what I was speaking about.
Or at least show the images that it tied to.
Should I go back one more to the full site plan?
I would think so, yes.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
Reset.
All right.
So here we have, as I said, we'll focus in around the project itself. There are other improvements up and down Brookline Avenue that we'll work with the city on very closely for the Brookline Avenue improvement. That's the studies, the raised bike lanes, the transit stop. Those, I think, as we heard, will take on a much greater life. Chris Donahue from MBVA, our landscape architect, has joined us as well to comment on this. So today we'll focus on in the core area of the building. Confirming that what you see now in sort of in the peachy tan color is the direct scope of work for the project. So we'll focus today around the core of the building along Brookline, Joslin, and Pilgrim Road. In a separate meeting, we'll discuss the improvements to the park, and then separately the longer term part of the project improvements of Brookline Avenue. Seth, I think will take a slightly longer term to work out with the various city agencies for the final configurations of bus stops and raised bike lanes along that corridor. Within the project itself, so you're familiar with what we're dealing with at grade. So working clockwise around the site itself, Longwood Center is the research building. So it has entries both at Longwood Avenue and on Brookline Avenue. There's street level retail. That's the focus of its major frontage. We have additional local retail fronting Brookline Avenue. And then as we wrap around Joslin Place, we have the main hospital lobby and entry, and then the service aspects of Pilgrim Road to the left-hand side. So our loading dock, our parking garage entry, and then continuing up the street, we have the Longwood Center loading and parking garage entries. Opposite Brookline Joslin Park is the BIDMC Emergency Department, additional local retail, as well as service areas. So I wanted to give you some context of what is animating the street around the block itself. The roadways and the street usage, primarily along Joslin Place, we have our 7-car cancer hospital drop-off. Now, the proposal is that the upper lane would be our drop-off and accessible drop-off. We have one travel lane westbound, so from Brookline Avenue up to Pilgrim Road, one lane of travel, no parking. And then on the opposite side of the park, one lane of travel back towards Brookline Avenue with turning lanes at the end, and then a drop-off. So really, we've worked over the past few weeks to minimize the amount of cars in circulation around Joslin Place, and you'll see that as we develop the street sections and sidewalk sections around the building itself. For context, this is Brookline Avenue today. So on the left is Joslin Diabetes Center with a bit of a hodgepodge of local retail, from banks to salad, poke bowls, and banh mi, to a physical therapist and a UPS store. So really serving the residents and visitors to the district. And then as we move towards Longwood Center, wrapping the block, really vibrant local retail from a food service perspective. So there's multiple food service vendors that wrap the corner, that super busy intersection, serving patients and visitors and researchers on a daily basis along Longwood Center. There's some offices at grade on Longwood Center as we move towards Pilgrim Road. And then Pilgrim Road, finally, today has that service aspect that our long-term planning supports. So the garage and service entries. Right now, there's the secondary door to Joslin Diabetes Center that takes the corner. But Pilgrim Road generally sort of unremarkable and back of house. Kevin, here's the updated walk around in the opposite direction now.
Okay. So this is the view from along Brookline. So you can see the relationship of the new orientation of the connector to the corner. You can see that quite clearly. The other thing, there's the small pedal and the big pedal that are sort of forming the upper facade, and then this gasket between Longwood Center and our building, which is a perforated terracotta screen, which will show up again along Pilgrim and along the base of the building. So as we look from Joslin Park, you see the two bigger pedals that are being framed by the stems, this 3-story high space that turns the corner back towards the connector, and the beginning of this sort of perforated terracotta base, where there'll be some occupied programs behind there that you'll get a sense of occupancy. And as we turn the corner along to Pilgrim, you'll see the pedal turns the corner, and the system changes on the upper floors to a metal panel system that runs along the gap in between Longwood Center and our building and turns the corner ever so slightly. The area where the connector from Pilgrim ties in is this sort of terracotta screen that sort of wraps from Joslin Place and then clads the parking garage. And we'll show that in a little more detail later, because it has a lot of impact on the texture and the presence along the streetscape there.
This is an axonometric cut of the first floor. we, in working with both proponents, understanding the grade change has been very important. We've internalized it, but we thought this was a good way of letting you understand how the building wraps and transitions in grade. So starting at Brookline Avenue, in that gasket that Kevin spoke of at the little pocket park, we have a staff entrance and the bike entrance. There's a egress stair, and behind that is our building support areas and bike room. A long frontage of local retail, so 5,000 square feet of retail that's opening out onto Brookline Avenue. We'll describe that in a minute. And then as we turn the corner, the lobby garden or internal spaces that we're working to develop with the proponents right now are transitioning slowly up grade. So we're at elevation 38 at the corner, and our main entrance is set roughly at elevation 46. So we push that down a little bit to try and bring as much activity as close to the street and make a way to ease the transition. And then that zone near the accessible drop-off that Kevin was speaking of, we're currently trying to develop and finally pin down the program and how much transparency we can include there. There are some things that from a regulatory standpoint, we have to have the fire pump room or other air intakes that we're navigating around as we then turn the corner to the staff entrance that's on Pilgrim Road. So some activation there, a very busy staff entrance that's then followed by the loading dock bay and the parking garage entry. There is a secondary entrance to Longwood Center that's in the back that's a staff entrance as well, and then the continuation of Pilgrim Road service areas. So what we thought would make sense to help you understand the project is to take you now in 3 sections to look and plan at the building, at how the streetscape and urban realm is proposed to be developed, and then to look at it in 3 dimensions. We have additional detail sections that we can pull up in discussion that look at each of these in more context. But right now, and Chris, please feel free to jump in here at any moment as we walk around the building. But along Brookline Avenue, with the new race cycle track, we're trying to maximize a buffer zone with as much planting and shade to the sidewalk as possible that separates out a small retail apron that's available for street activation as those 1, 2, or 3 retail establishments have a clear area to be able to activate the sidewalk, clear of the very busy circulation path with a number of planters that are meant to be integrated into the building base as we walk around the corner. When we get to the intersection, there's a new crosswalk over to the park. We'll discuss the park separately, but as you turn the corner up to Joslin Place, the idea is that there's a continuity of landscape at the building base. Chris, you can jump in, or I'll move over to Joslin Park.
Sure. I'll just say briefly that, excuse me, one of the really helpful things that came out of that exercise where we started to diagram a sort of landscape framework, where we went through the idea of creating conceptual sections, is that we started to talk very critically as a team as to what this landscape had to do from a performance standpoint, and that the landscape at the base of a building of this size and complexity and that deals with very specific and very different types of programs, that green bar means quite a lot sectionally. And so in this case, and sometimes that landscape has to negotiate 6 to 8 feet of grade change between the elevation of the lobby and the elevation of the public realm. And if it were a right angle, that creates a really awkward kind of, terrible urban condition at the street level. And so the idea that there can be some continuity where it serves as a sort of landscape and architecture coming together is part of what we're suggesting with that band of landscape that wraps around, excuse me, from Brookline to Joslin Place. And that at the street side, it can perform a really strong role in providing some stormwater infrastructure, that grove can become more than just a clump of trees, but part of the civil infrastructure, part of the attitude for sustainability that becomes a really positive piece of the streetscape. And we've been working with VHB on models for what that can be, so that it's not just a trash collector, because we know that is a very real possibility if it's just a low point adjacent to the road. And so thinking about ways to look at that very differently. And then just building on, using the sort of baseline metrics of the complete streets model that we've been able to sort of work with, but then develop with quite a lot of specificity around the unique programs for this building. So what that streetscape and furnishing, how that greenscape and furnishing row plays a really active role in providing pedestrian safety for people coming and going from the entry to the lobby, queuing up to get to that ADA drop off, and a sidewalk that goes beyond the minimum requirements based on the complete streets to allow for safe and accessible entry coming and going from the Future Cancer Hospital project.
And then as we move around to the more utilitarian Pilgrim Road, we again, as Chris said, are widening the sidewalk and setting the building back. So we have at least 11 feet here to provide really excellent sight lines for pedestrian safety for vehicles and loading dock entry that are moving in and out of the parking garage and loading dock. And then as we move west or towards the Riverway, we'll talk separately about Joslin Park and pick up on many of the comments that we heard about the street improvement zone below the Pilgrim connector. But it may be more beneficial to look at these in 3 dimensions to see the intended transparency and materiality of the building and how we're intending to really treat the public realm comprehensively. We do have sections here if there are questions about what's actually the property line and what we're proposing in terms of easements into the property for these widened sidewalks and widened public zones. So in the next series of views, we'll take us around the building to provide better 3-dimensional context for the plan views.
So many of these views we saw in the earlier presentation, but we're going to just sort of map the activities along the base of the building. So this is obviously looking west with a piece of the storefront. And then when we look at the facade, this sort of shows the activities that are occurring there, the landscape transition at the corridor, looking into the main lobby, the bike lane, some of the storefronts. And then as we look at Joslin Park, again, the relationship of the connector to the lobby, and then this map of the activities across that facade, and the relationship back to the Dana building. So the activity on the facade, again, you start to see the drop off, which is going across the whole front, the main lobby, the main entry, and the beginning of this textured terracotta wall that you see along the base on the left. And that will have windows in it and a sense of occupancy in a number of different areas. And then as we turn the corner, we get a sense of what this looks like along Pilgrim. So there are a couple
different... 2 minutes left.
Okay, we're almost done here. Okay. A couple different entrances, staff entrance, loading dock, the parking entrance for the garage, and this textured terracotta system that wraps the corner. And here's just the view from further down Pilgrim. Now, Michael, take us home here.
All right. So we are thinking about this comprehensively, and we know that you want to as well. But in the interest of time, what we want to do is make sure that we convey to you that we are thinking about Joslin Park and how the pedestrian realm adjacent to the building interacts with where the Parks Department and Parks Commission eventually guides us with the design of that park, and how we think about this from building face to building face. There's a vast complexity at play here in terms of the rights of way for both Deaconess and Joslin Place, as well as the City of Boston Park in the middle, that utility tunnel and various easements, and how Chris and his team look at the various frontage, pedestrian, and greenscape zones as we move across the park. When we began to meet with the City Parks Department and interagency commissions, we realized that there are opportunities, and how can we look at those opportunities to come back to you hopefully at the next section with feedback from them for what the park could be. So is there this opportunity not only at the north side of the park with the travel lanes of Joslin Park, but also to the south side to potentially see is there the ability to look at the public realm in a different way, whether that's maintaining the sidewalks or furnishing zones that the Public Improvement Commission wants to maintain at the edges of roadways, to the ability for the park to blur those boundaries. So rest assured, we are looking comprehensively at this section, and we'll be able to return to you at a future date to talk about the park in more detail. We know you're going to ask the question, but rest assured we're getting there. But we wanted to share today to get your feedback about the areas immediately adjacent to the building and the kind of porosity and materiality that we're looking at there. So that yes, go ahead, Shauna.
Thank you for the sort of brief presentation. Can I just ask a couple of clarifying questions?
Sure.
And I know we're talking about the park later, but did it look like you're considering only having 2 lanes in front of your building now instead of 3?
That is correct. We working with VHB, it might have been a graphic issue, but the distinct proposal is for 1 drop-off lane adjacent to the sidewalk and 1 lane of travel. That's 121-foot lane to allow if there's the occasional double parking or the minimum that that the fire department wants to see. But the proposal really is, and with the support of both proponents, 1 drop-off lane and 1 travel lane at both Joslin and Deaconess.
Excellent. You know, I understand we'll talk about the park later. I would like to understand the grade conditions at the corner, this corner that we're looking at better. I'd like to know specifically the number. And I think I don't think we have that level of detail for right now. I think the renderings, of course, are beautiful, but I'd really like to understand what that condition is. How solid is the glass? Like when you're standing on the street, at what height is the floor above you? Is it above my eye height? What do you see? It looks like the glass is coming all the way down. It looks in like this perspective that there's a gap between the glass and the interior floor plate. I don't know if that actually is the case. So I'd really like to understand that, because I think I think it's really first of all, how high at that corner, how high is the floor plate above the sidewalk?
So that's what that's what we're developing right now, Shauna. So the grade at the corner at Brookline is 38. Our lobby elevation is 46.5. So we've worked to try and within accessibility limits, pull the first floor down as possible. And with the proponents and Chris and his team, we're looking at ways of further creating areas within the building that lower occupied spaces to minimize that transition, so that both the interior and exterior program it can ease their way up, as also using, Chris, I don't want to speak for you, but using landscape to help make up some of that transition as well, both interior and exterior potentially.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be pretty critical, because you're saying like the current condition, if you don't do anything, is about 8.5 feet difference between the sidewalk and the floor plate, which is higher than all of our eye heights. So I think that's something to think about. I'm also curious, and I'm not against it, but I'm curious that you can get away with an 8-foot wide sidewalk. And again, I'm not saying that I am against it. I'm just, and the reason I'm asking that is because if the sidewalk needs to be wider, because of transportation department pushes, it's going to really impact the amount of greenscape that we have in order to kind of bridge that elevation change. So understanding that is also really, really important. And I'm just giving a couple of really quick reactions, and then I'll pass it on to my other colleagues. My other reaction is, poor Pilgrim, it's just getting hit on every side. So I know it's clearly the back of house, but it certainly feels like the back of house. So, you know, and I know it's serving a lot of it has a lot of service issues that it needs to serve, but is there anything that you can do to that streetscape and the building facade in that area to make it feel a little bit more, you know, kind of at least side of house?
Yeah, and Anne Marie, I'll say it's only the 3 of us, so I think you can just chime in.
Okay, thank you. I would just add to, you know, as I was looking at this, one is, you know, I would like to see in future presentations, you provided views of the faces, the existing context along Brookline. I'd like to see that along Pilgrim, and then looking at this plan as a pedestrian. So first of all, I generally, as a pedestrian, I do a lot of walking, avoid crossing in front of like the parking ramp and the loading dock. So in my mind, that puts more emphasis on the need to really think about the quality of the pedestrian experience on the Deaconess building side of the road. And then also think about the public realm, you know, as the, you know, as the entire, as the collective experience of being in Joslin Park. So I'm a little concerned. I understand the need in a large scale project like this to break it up into components. But when we were first presented with this project, there was a lot of emphasis on the opportunity to make an improvement to Joslin Park. And I just want to make sure that that we're really enhancing the quality of the pedestrian experience, particularly when I think of as a patient, people are stressed, they're not feeling well. So how can we ensure that the quality of the experience for somebody, either whether you're walking along the street or you're in a car looking out the window, that it looks like a realm that's intended to be for pedestrians? We're seeing a lot of blank walls, Core 10, they're reference to Core 10. And this is, I understand from a design standpoint, when you think about the composition of the new building, why that's appealing, but I just can't help but wonder what it would feel like to be, a pedestrian standing in that space. So that's something, as we look at this project again in the future, I'd like to better understand the quality of the space from a pedestrian perspective.
Maybe I'll just add on. I'm just thinking about how narrow your sidewalks are along Joslin Place and the type of activity that happens around these hospitals. If I know the Longwood area, I know it's such a busy place. And there's a couple of things that I'm worried about that might require you to zoom in at the next meeting and really describe where people could stand. But that entry point seems like it's well positioned because of the grading. I get that. But it has, I think, architecturally, the stem coming down in that gray zone, which is really tightening up the aperture for people who are waiting to get picked up, or maybe this isn't where people, all people enter and get dismissed from the hospital. But if it is, it's a really tight pinch point. And so then it's going to put a lot of pressure on this sidewalk. Like, where do people sit and wait? Where do they stand and wait? And it feels tight. And so maybe just zooming in on the street furniture and even putting, you know, plans of bodies about how many people would stand there, because I really feel what's going to happen, especially in inclement weather and a day like today, everyone's going to be in that vestibule because they just can't figure out where their, ride is or who's picking them up. And so just understanding what happens in terms of activities along that street or sidewalk and entry point would really be helpful if you could just zoom in a little
Sure.
bit more.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And where people can sit down, I think, again, people often, you might be waiting for somebody to pick you up, somebody's dropped off. So where are those opportunities to do that in all kinds of weather? If it's a nice day, where can I sit out and actually be in the sunlight? These are all really important, quality of place issues, particularly in an environment where people are, in treatment and are, looking for some relief from being inside a building. And that's why I think going back to, and I'm not, still not convinced about the Pilgrim Way Bridge, but if that's why I'm kind of intrigued by the loggia idea, because could that become a sheltered space where people could have some respite as well? So I just worry sometimes it feels like this is becoming, there's so much pressure on the utility of the space of moving people through. How can we also think about places for people to rest and get some respite?
What is the happening in the wing between the loading dock and the sidewalk? What is that program, more or less?
So Sean, I think you're talking about this this area here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is it's one of the areas of the most intense focus right now for the design and engineering team. So we're, as Kevin mentioned, we're working to try and move program there that can have more transparency or visibility to the street, as well as trying to juggle some technical challenges with the location of the fire pump room, the fire stair, as well as some air intake plenums that we need to work around, but we're putting every effort that we can to try and bring some transparency and animation to that section of facade. We don't have a firm commitment yet to bring that to you today, but we are working on trying for the next time that we come to have a more better understanding of what can be there.
In those zones I just highlighted, and some of those areas are pretty private areas with patients and families, so providing light but not necessarily a view in, because they're pretty discrete activities occurring there. So we definitely want to give a sense of occupancy and light
I actually have we had two thoughts about that area that are in conflict with each other. The first is the one that you were just talking about it not, about it having sort of vibrancy and activity. The other one I was wondering about is if that area were to be at a different level than the rest of the lobby, does that give you some flexibility in pushing the lobby down? Because I am worried that without the thickness of the green, and when we really start looking at the section of the building, of the streetscape, that there is going to be an uncomfortable height difference between the sidewalk. It'll be hard to mask that difference between the height of the sidewalk and height of the lobby.
Yeah.
So I guess my question, that was just an idea, but my question, but the bigger challenge to me is, how do we push the lobby down?
Oh,
or
Shauna,
at least parts of the lobby down?
Have you been listening into our design and coordination meetings for the past year? We have, as a team, been struggling mightily with that. One of the key issues that we're dealing with is the grade of Joslin Park, of Joslin Place itself, and that the only location that we can put the accessible drop-off is where it is. So we're fighting the natural topography of the landscape and trying to find a large enough location and get it close enough to the entry. Our team has really been working to try and push that level 1 down as close as possible to Brookline Avenue to mitigate that grade change that you spoke of at the corner. We're really, we think, at the limit of how far down we can go, both to ease that transition, but also to get the coordination of structure inside. We've that's with you completely. That's been one of our biggest struggles, to try and find the right calibration of that level up and down. We've really pushed it as low as we can technically.
Yeah, that's the problem with grading, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't always do what you want it to do.
But
Chris,
Sean, is on the inside, there's a zone that we're looking at that we can actually
lower.
Yeah.
That's what
so
I was
that
wondering.
the perception from the street will not be the extreme thing that you're thinking about.
Yeah, and Chris, I don't know if at any project we've gotten into micrograding as schematic design to try and just work out the travels and cross slopes for from the street to the entry.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's saying the same thing. Grading is an extreme challenge on this site, right? I mean, the 10-foot difference from west to east is it makes that very challenging. And so I think everything we're doing, whether it's planting or something else, we are, as Michael said, exploring it like from every angle, trying to make that something that is welcoming and, part of the public realm, but helps to negotiate that grade change. It's none of our intents to leave that 8-foot differential as part of the solution here by any stretch.
So maybe it makes sense to come with some sections, next time. I'm just thinking about, a section from, I guess you're calling it the Winter Garden, that area that Kevin, you said you could look at lowering the height.
Yeah, lowering along the perimeter, that there would be a planted zone that's really closer to the elevation of the street, and that it sort of terraces up within the building.
But that programmatically, are you calling that corner the Winter Garden?
We don't have a name for it yet, Mimi.
Okay, that's what it was called at one point, I believe. So that's why it's stuck in my head. But the inside to outside section, especially if it's a winter garden, it seems like it would want to connect. And
Yes.
so I'm just curious about a series of sections, maybe at, you know, the highest grade differential all the way to, you know, a couple of feet. Like, how are you treating that with the landscape would be helpful to see
I
sections.
think, you know, I think this is coming up with the connectors as well, because it's hard to separate the, or, you know, the urban realm issues on the connector, so that if we have much more detail and experiential drawings and sections that sort of map these conditions in and around the front of the building here, in and around and under the Pilgrim connector, and along the Pilgrim Road facade of the building, just so you can sense the layering and the level of detail.
Yeah.
Because right now, I agree, it's sort of hard to understand that.
Can you go to a plan
Oh, sure.
where you had, it was like a diagram of where the planting beds are, like that one in the corner, at the very corner, that it's a green zone. It's lovely, but I wonder, do you have more paving along the perimeter to grow this, for instance? I don't know. These are the things that we need to see. Like, what are the trade-offs to push paving to the perimeter in order to get more planting to reduce that steep slope?
Yeah, because we're going from like a 15-foot wide sidewalk to 9 feet.
Mhm.
And then what's the balance between sidewalk and landscape as we move up the slope?
Exactly.
And then we expand up to at least 11 feet plus the furnishing zone for that active drop-off space.
Right. Like, is there a trade-off where you don't have planting zone at the perimeter, but you really give it towards the building, so that's a softer or gradual
Yeah.
change, is what I'm curious about.
Mimi, one of the things I think I'd like to do to sort of talk about some of these conditions is to map some of the conditions that exist, for instance, at Klarman, and how they compare, because that very condition that you're talking about, I think there's a thinner band of planting along the street to do what you're talking about, but it's established enough so that it feels like you're walking through a landscape.
Which is nice.
And yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I
I think it
totally
would-
get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
think it-
just, yeah.
I just want to reiterate, I think the value of looking at, you know, next time we look at the public realm, looking at it as, you know, the kind of a city square, creating a place and thinking about it in its entirety. I'm just looking at, you know, Google Maps at the Klarman building on Deaconess, and just sort of understanding what's happening on each side of the square. You know, how do the activities, the landscaping balance each other out? You know, where is their continuity? Because I think this will be more successful, you know, as a development if you think of it as a, you know, as an ensemble rather as individual elements. I'm a little concerned that if we focus too much on the construction of the new building, it's going to be a new thing in and of itself at the cost of creating, you know, a welcoming place, you know, at Joslin Park.
I think we do, though, have to balance, and Maria, I think Chris and I have a meeting with the Parks Commissioner tomorrow morning, that Joslin Park is a city park. So how we balance what the city wants to see for the development of that space versus the proponents' goals from
And
opposite
I'm
sides.
sorry, and just to be
Yeah.
clear, my reference is less to the park itself, but the perimeter of the structure surrounding the park. So think about a great European square. What makes a great European square? You know, how what's happening on the sides and what is unifying versus what is distinct. I'm sorry, but I do need to sign off. So
I know
sorry
you're
to
signing
leave
off,
early.
Marie, and Marie, and we haven't had public comments yet. Seth, I don't know if we want to move to that, but it's only going to be Shauna and me.
Yeah, I think we've had a good discussion about the public realm, and look forward to everything we talked about, seeing developments and everything we talked about.
Okay, so hopefully you all can see my screen. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. I'm looking for hands, and I do see one from Allison Poltinas. Let me, Allison, ask you to unmute. And can you?
Yeah, thank you. A couple of quick thoughts. Pilgrim Road definitely needs street trees, and in the future there will be more pedestrians and more cyclists on that road as it becomes two-way all the way to the Riverway. So something to think about. And Brookline Avenue, of course, has that very busy bus stop on the block right now, where you'll see many, many people waiting for the buses to Brighton and Chestnut Hill. So a wider sidewalk is definitely something that should be thought about. And again, whether there's a conflict with this raised bike lane and how to resolve that. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Appreciate it. Any other public comments? Okay. Was there somebody else there? Okay, not seeing anybody else. That concludes the public comment portion of the meeting. And commissioners, I will turn it back to you if I can stop sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shauna said it. We'd love to see, you know, responses to all of our comments on both the bridges and the public realm. I feel like we had enough discussion to give you feedback to know what to come back with. And so as long as you're feeling good about that, we look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for the feedback. And, you know, we'll be back with lots of things to think about.
Yes, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
I will just, you know, acknowledge it's a really, really difficult site and a difficult program that you're trying to fit in. And so the hard work is showing. It's just you know, we're asking for a little bit more study. But
Okay, no worries.
trust that you'll get there.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.